In this video, I'm going to discuss Nikon's autofocus system, specifically as it relates to the Nikon Z9 with latest firmware 4.1, but also as it relates to other cameras. I hear a lot of things that just don't make sense, such as I was using bird subject detection with IAF and it happily locked onto the eye of a fox, and no, it didn't, or it shouldn't. And things like 3D autofocus uses color under the selected focus point to determine what to track, which is what the manual says, but it is not true in the majority of cases. And I'll explain all of that and more as I go through this video. But I think it helps to have some background as to terminology and how these systems actually work. And this is a document from Nikon. It's on the predictive focus tracking system overall. And this first page here, or section, just discusses how phase detection autofocus works. And it basically has a left-right image cast to two separate line sensors, which are comparing each other for position or phase. And this is basically how it works, the simplified drawings I made. When in focus, the images, left and right, are in the same position on the sensor line. When front focused, they are in, and when back focused, they are outside of where they should be when in focus. And for a mirrorless, it's using a left and right virtual image, and in focus or outside, either front or back focused, of where it should fall on the image sensor is how it knows whether it's in focus or not. It has no concept of distance in and of itself, and it doesn't need to know. This second section of the article talks about predictive focus tracking system uses special algorithms to forecast the position of the subject at the moment the image is captured based on measurements of the subject's movement and moves the lens accordingly. Nikon has adopted a proprietary technology called overlap servo. And overlap servo, from the Nikon glossary, is an autofocus method that provides continuous focus detection and calculation as the lens is being driven, allowing you to perform faster, more precise autofocus, especially with moving subjects. What that's saying is that phase detection autofocus is not open loop. It is closed loop. Open loop, there's a theory out there that the camera measures the phase offset, determines how far to drive the lens, and drives it to that position without second checking, without verifying focus. And that is not the case. It has never been the case with Nikon autofocus systems for as long as I can remember. Now, I didn't use the very first autofocus systems Nikon introduced, so maybe it was the case once upon a time, but since the late 90s, it has not been. And down here it talks about the Cam 3500, and this is an older AF system, the D3 series timeframe. It says, moreover, the 15 areas at the center can recognize both vertical and horizontal movement patterns regardless of the type of lens used. And that's because the 15 central focus points on that system, the Cam 3500, are cross type. So it has a vertical line sensing pair of sensors and a horizontal line sensing pair of sensors to create a cross type focus point. Now, a few notes over here that I've made. Autofocus for phase detection autofocus does not require distance information. It only requires to see a measurable phase offset or difference with a scene of sufficient contrast, and to know the direction of the offset, or which direction the focus needs to be driven. This phase offset, or depth of focus, is affected by everything that affects depth of field: focal length, subject distance, aperture in use. And so different focal length lenses focused at different distances and at different apertures may result in exactly the same phase offset and require the same correction. But it's not that simple because different lenses use different drive systems. They have different focus motors. They have different focus throw distances, meaning a short focal length can get to infinity focus way quicker than a long focal length lens can. So for that reason, lens information is required to calibrate the different systems and know exactly what it's doing, but still it doesn't need distance information. History of autofocus, just real quick. Phase detection autofocus was invented in about 1975 by Honeywell and was introduced in 76 on Pentax, and the first autofocus systems were lens-based and the drive motors were in the lenses. Nikon first introduced phase detection autofocus in 1986 in the f501. They did have autofocus a little before that, but it was contrast-based. In 92, Nikon introduced D lenses, which report distance information to the system, but that was used primarily for flash calculations. And then the F5 was introduced in 96 with a 3D color matrix meter to incorporate subject distance for general exposure calculations. And then in 2007, Nikon introduced the D3 and D300, which introduced the 3D tracking, which takes the information from the 3D color matrix meter and incorporates that into autofocus. So the third D dimension is distance. Prior to that, it was 2D. So this is basically the way the systems work. We've got focus tracking. Tracking follows behind. So the subject moves, focus follows, focus reacquires. Predictive focus tracking, initially subject moves, focus follows, and focus is reacquired because it takes a few samples for it to have a pattern to be able to predict what's going to happen next. And in 2D, distance information is based on the rate of the change in the phase offset of the images the phase detection system is using. In predictive 3D, we add the third dimension of distance, and it follows and then it predicts. So it's going to be pre-focused. It also pre-focuses with the previous version. And then it confirms. And the two bits of information that 3D focus uses from the color matrix meter is subject distance with D lenses or anything later, and the color of the subject within the scene. Now, we obviously, with the mirrorless cameras, no longer have the 3D color matrix meter. We have a color sensor, image sensor. Back with the 3D system, it was like 34,000 different images in the database that the camera used to compare to decide what's going on, what the subject actually is, and how to offset the exposure for that. We obviously don't have the matrix meter now, but we definitely have a database of information in the Z cameras. Probably way more than 30,000 images. It's now got subjects, it's got subject eyes, it's got different types of subjects. So while we don't have this system in the mirrorless cameras, what we have is this plus. Now we'll get into the Z stuff specific. First off, we'll talk about focus tracking with lock-on settings. Because there's a lot of misleading information in there. One of the main things to know is that with most settings, it's going to operate in the default 3. If you are in 3D, it's going to be using the default mode of 3. If you're in auto area, it's going to use the default mode of 3 when 3, 2, or 1 is selected. You can select delayed, and it will make a minuscule difference in how long the delay takes. The other thing to know about it is not a blocked shot setting anymore. This changed back with the D5, D500, with the 153 point autofocus system. This changed. This is now a reset focus delay. It has nothing to do with whether or not there's something blocking the shot. It's whether or not the camera has the focus point, selected focus point on the subject or not. And then the next one, subject motion with lock on, steady versus erratic. The thing to know about this is it has nothing to do with how fast the subject is moving side to side or how erratic the subject is moving side to side. This has to do with the distance prediction using distance information reported from the lens to the system. So if you have a subject that is prone to sudden starts and stops or sudden changes in the rate of closure or how fast it's approaching the camera, then you would need to choose erratic. But for most subjects, steady is going to be the better choice. A subject suitable for erratic might be a pole vaulter. You're at the end of the course, pole vaulter is running directly at you as fast as he can, suddenly plants the pole and launches vertically. His rate of closure rapidly changes, going from towards you to vertical, and that would be erratic. Otherwise, steady is the one to use. Now I mention this because first off, it is not what it says it is, a block shot, and secondly because this professional settings guide doesn't talk about any block shot settings for any autofocus modes with subject detection. Auto for subject detection options in the shooting menu is what they recommend in general. So all these are assuming auto. Now I would certainly pick human if I was doing track and field or whatever. And then for any autofocus mode, they're suggesting primarily 3D or auto area. With either of them, you have a selection of 3 or faster for block shot. It's going to operate as 3. So these settings are largely negated, which is why they're primarily left out. You will see that for anywhere where it's suggesting a dynamic area autofocus mode, it does specify block shot settings. And this would lead you to think that it only applies when subject detection is not in effect, but that is not the case. You will note that it selects 3 or faster for the block shot delay for each of these cases. In wide area, also notice in the previous page, wide area is not mentioned here. Wide area, you can select a faster autofocus response, and it is here listed with block shot response faster than 3. Next thing to know is the autofocus modes only perform and operate as described in the manual when subject detection is not in effect. When subject detection is in effect, the focus mode you choose has little to do with how the camera behaves in terms of autofocus. At the most, what it does is limit the area at which the camera will track a subject it likes. And it does not limit it to only the area you have selected or highlighted. It's larger than that by some 4 focus points. And the last thing to know is that the camera lies to you when you are doing, if you review the focus points, the camera lies unless you are in auto area. If you're in auto area and subject is not detected as being in focus, the EXIF reports no focus position, horizontal or vertical, and does not show a focus point. This is what it shows for in focus in auto area. You've got your focus position horizontal and vertical, also in XY location, and the size of the focus area. And it is, in this case, 2 up from center. In this case, this is wide area, and the camera is reporting as being in focus and is showing a focus point. And it will show the focus point on review if it's a JPEG or a RAW file. And this is using View in X to show these. And this is what it shows for the focus point information when wide area is not in focus. It shows in focus, it shows a focus location, and it shows a focus width. So basically what it's showing me is what I selected, whether it's in focus or not. And we know it's not in focus because what's under it's not in focus. And the bird, which is what I was trying to track, is nowhere near that position. Now the bird may or may not be in focus just by coincidence and being within the depth of field or at the same distance at which the camera was focused, but the camera does not know that. And just to make it even more obvious, I have this picture which is taken in 3D autofocus mode, and it's quite obvious that nothing is even close to in focus. The camera wasn't even trying to confirm focus initially because it was in release priority, and it is still showing that there was an active focus point in focus in NX Studio. So now we'll get into some actual live view recordings of Z9 autofocus modes and behaviors. Okay, in this first video I'm going to demonstrate that phase detection autofocus is not open loop. It's not set and forget. We do that first by selecting AFS, single servo focus, and then we'll select the focus mode that does not have subject detection, and this is a single point. And using a slow focusing lens, in this case I have the 28-300 walk around lens attached, we can first focus on something very near. So we'll focus about here. Then we'll pick something about mid-range with decent contrast and initiate autofocus. And as autofocus is driving, I will move the focus point to a distant subject. We can see that it is secured focus at the distant subject and not at the mid-range where focus was initiated. We can do the opposite. We'll start here at the distance, come down here to mid-range. We will reinitiate, and we can see it didn't work. Let's go a little further, try that again. It's about here, and it is focused at near and not there where it was initiated. So there you go. Autofocus is not open loop. Now let's look at block shot response settings. Let's start by going into a dynamic autofocus mode, which do not use subject detection. And we're going to start by focusing on the subject in the background. And as we move to the subject in the foreground, you're going to find that it changes to the foreground well before it should. There's no reason why this should have lost focus on the subject in the background because it's still well within the expanded area. And it is not using a nearest priority that the wide areas have. So really, block shot response should be called autofocus refocus delay. And that started with about the D850 and D5, this behavior where it will abandon the subject even though it should be able to track it after a certain timeout period. And the block shot delay setting does affect that. So we'll go to 1, we'll pick up our subject in the background, move over, and it picks it up much more quickly. It refocuses much more quickly. Now, so you might say that I'm repositioning the focus point. There's not something moving in front of my subject blocking the shot. But I've tried this both ways, having my wife move and place the other subject in front of the background subject, and the behavior is exactly the same. Now we can check block shot response with subject recognition, and even though the advanced shooting guide seems to indicate that the block shot response settings do not apply with subject recognition, it does have some effect. So we'll change the focus mode to, we'll go to wide area large, You can see subject recognition is working. It's picked up her eye in the background. And as we have the focus area move forward, you'll see it jumps to the near subject and refocuses on her eye. And we can change this setting from delayed to quick. You can see how quick it is now. It's much quicker. Okay, here I've changed my test scene so we can go over how subject recognition affects autofocus behaviors of the Z9 specifically. Here I have got subject recognition auto between animals, humans, and vehicles. And we can see that it is working. We'll zoom in a bit. It has got Rachel Ray's eye in focus, and it should be obvious here that the focus mode, and we're in wide area large right now, does not restrict autofocus to only the focus area highlighted. We can see that it's focusing on her eye almost to the periphery of the image area. And if we go down here, we can see it picks up the stuffed cat's eye. It believes it's a cat. We come over here, it picks up the bird's eye and believes that's a bird. So we can see subject recognition is working as it should. And if I zoom out, we'll see that subject recognition chooses what it wants to choose, not necessarily what I would want it to choose. Let me go out a little further here. If I want it to focus on the cat, it may not. It will pick, in this case, the subject it thinks is better, which is humans. And if I'm in auto mode, it may give me an option to select between what it considers to be the best subjects or points of focus in the scene. But again, it still may not be what I want it to be. Because here it is, I'm in auto and it's still picking up Rachel, and I'm trying to get it to focus on the cat, and there it finally focuses on the cat. I want it to focus on the bird, and it will not focus on the bird. No matter what I do, if I like eliminate everybody else, it will, well, it still doesn't like that bird. Zoom in, make it a little more picky where it doesn't have much choice. So first thing is first, subject recognition rules. It chooses what it wants to choose, and the focus mode you choose is more of a focus priority. It does not restrict focus and subject recognition only to that area you have chosen. The next thing to know is that the subject recognition modes are restrictive. Meaning, if I change my subject recognition to humans only, and let's change it to a focus mode that's a little clearer as to what's going on, we can see it will focus on a subject other than a human, but it will not do eye recognition. It will do not face, subject, or eye recognition. But if I go to a human, it will. Similarly, if I restrict the focus to birds, it will not do eye recognition. You can see here it's kind of not sure what it's doing. It's trying to decide if there might be a bird there. If I go down here, kind of does the same thing. It's not sure, it's kind of confused. But if I go to the bird, we actually get it to step down to eye recognition. Subject recognition is functioning as it should. So the focus mode's subject recognition choice is restrictive. It eliminates those that you have not permitted. However, what happens is the camera will revert to the primary focus mode if there's nothing of the subject in there. So it's not going to leave you completely hanging, but it's not going to do subject recognition. It's not going to zoom in or focus in on a face or an eye. It's just going to stay in that generic focus mode, as if subject recognition was turned off. And that's the other thing. The focus modes do not really act as the description says unless subject recognition is turned off. Here is, let me turn this back to auto so I can choose all of them. And I'll add a 3D focus mode now. And you can see it's grabbing the eye. Grabbing an eye, focusing on the eye. And if I put it on the nose, it's grabbing an eye. Whereas 3D is supposed to select and focus on the information based on color underneath the focus point. It's not going to do that. It's going to pick the eye because subject recognition is overruling the focus mode's general behavior characteristics. However, if I turn subject recognition off, now it will track the nose as per the description of how 3D autofocus functions. So this is what we would expect. And this is not. This is subject recognition. Well, that about covers everything. I hope some of you have found this useful and informative. Till next time, bye.